What's going on, guys? I hope you're having a great day out there. So any of you that caught the last video, we were talking about some of the key upgrades that I've done to each one of my cars here in the fleet. And today we're going to talk about what I absolutely hated about each one of my cars straight out of the box. Now, obviously, a lot of these cars have been, upgraded, but we're going to talk about what they were in their stock form and what was just the worst parts of the cars and what some of the things that still are to this day the worst parts of these cars. Kind of give you an idea if you pick up one of these models, out of the box, what you're going to be looking at and the things that are the worst parts of them. So if you're interested, stay tuned, everybody. Now, if you're like, what is this dude doing with the shop videos constantly? We want to see some bashing. Trust me, I get it. However, it finally stopped raining today. It has been raining for 2.5 days straight while I was home here from work. And then it snowed, and now it's super cold today. And I have no time because I have to pack and leave for work tomorrow. So we're in the shop where it's a little warmer, and we'll get back to bashing soon, I promise. Now, obviously, many of these cars, the issues we're going to talk about, there are other upgrades out there. It depends on if you want to spend the money for them also. And the Kraton 8S and the Outcast 8S is two big ones. There's one very key component on both of these cars to fix the problem, but it is not cheap. Well, we're going to criticize the Outcast 4S first. Now, we're going to be talking straight out of the box. No upgrades, just you pulled this thing out of the box and you got it in your hands now. And what's some of the worst things about the car? Outcast 4S, servo, and servo saver. Very weak, terrible. Now, obviously, I have upgraded my servo on this car with a HItec servo. I still have not yet to this day upgraded my servo saver, and it is honestly the only weak link and part of this car at this point. The steering on this thing absolutely stinks, to be honest with you. I am going to work on a servo saver arm. And if anybody's got, a great either servo saver that they've used on here that works really well, or the elimination arm just to even go away with the servo saver, I know that's harder on a servo, but I want to get some steering on this car, and I got to find some way to fix this problem because I love the Outcast 4S, but the steering on this thing is absolutely trash, especially in heavier grass and heavier dirt. It does not work very well. The other thing is, obviously, with heavy bashing, the chassis is a little on the weak side. If you're going to be taking this thing to the skate park, definitely recommend the chassis brace. But honestly, the servo and the steering on this thing was the thing I hated the most out of this car, out of the box. Now, I just brought the Typhon down here on the bench, and honestly, guys, I'm kind of having a hard time thinking of out of the box what I hated about this car. I've loved this car from day one. It has been one of my favorite launchers. I mean, this thing just flies like a missile, as many of you guys know. If I had to say one thing out of the box, and it's not even just a Typhon thing, it's a Arma 6S model thing. It's across all of them. It doesn't matter which one. Is this upper hinge pin brace for the front upper hinge pins. The plastic one is really weak. They should have never made that plastic. It was kind of a big mistake. Obviously, I have the M2C Racing aluminum one on here. But out of anything out of this car, straight out of the box, the thing's awesome. So really the only complaint I have about this car, my amazing Tekno ET48 2.0. Now, this thing started out as a race car. Out of the box, the thing was awesome. It was an awesome build. It was a blast. I'm honestly looking at getting the new MT410 2.0 version. I'm not sure I'm going to put in it yet, but I believe I am going to pick up another Tekno, guys. But as a basher and out of the box, I would have to say the worst part about this car was definitely the bracing. Now, I know they were going for weight because this was considered a race car. But if I had to complain about one thing out of this car was definitely the lack of support in the front here and bending this longer front center drive shaft and also this upper steering block. Probably the only really issue I had with this thing. This thing's been awesome. This has been one of my favorite bashers. I mean, this thing's it's a great car. But again, the stiffness in the chassis and this brace, if you're going to bash this thing, obviously that has been the number one issue I had with this car out of the box when I converted it into a basher. But that's really about it. I said this a million times. Guys, if you're looking for an amazing car and a really, really fun build, pick yourself up one of these Teknos. It is just an awesome time putting these together. It was some of the most enjoyable time I had just coming down here to the bench for probably about a week straight when I was in between work, coming down here and just building this car and putting it together. It was a really good time, so highly recommend the Tekno builds. Ah, yes, the Italian hoagie. One of my favorites. But again, as many of you probably know, this was my most hated car out of the box I ever bought. I honestly wanted to just immediately sell this thing, run it over with my truck. I hated this car out of the box. And it was really a very simple fix. Honestly, it was the tires. The tires with the stock power system in this thing was absolute garbage. And I know I mentioned this in the last video, so I know I'm kind of repeating myself here. But again, if I'm picking out one thing out of the box that I hated about this car for bashing and staying with the stock power system, is the tires. The tires was the biggest hindrance for this car that they did. It just did not work. If you want to just stay on the pavement and spin around in the grass and not really air this thing out or anything, might be fine. But if you're going to jump this car at all, the tires on that thing that come in the box, terrible. Garbage, no air control, throw them out. And yes, I was just chatting with some guys in the comments here this morning about the way that the Italian kind of sits. It has a very low stance to it. People were talking about wanting to put different springs and shocks on this to bring us up. But honestly, I truly believe that the Italian is meant to have that lower slung to the ground stance. It keeps it stable, keeps it to the ground, and I definitely wouldn't change it. Well, I'm going to bust out one of the Kratons. Now, this was originally my Kraton EXB, I do believe. Yes, this was originally my Kraton EXB. It turned into the Kraton XL. Obviously have the version 2 Kraton XL, which is currently my problem child. But if we're talking Kraton, not Kraton XL, but what this originally was out of the box, the biggest issue this car had, now this is going back to the first release of the Kraton 6S EXB. And many of you know the headaches that happened with the rear differentials in these things. It was a nightmare for many of us that got the first run of these things. But and this is going to go for, honestly, all Arma 6S cars, whether it be, the Typhon, Italian, Kraton. Get rid of the stock gear case in the back. The case on these things, the plastic ones, basically are the culprit to destroying a lot of your rear differentials and having problems with them. Pick up an aluminum one, and 99% of your problems with differentials will go away. So that was honestly, I know the new versions are coming with the aluminum differential cases now, and they have fixed that. So that's kind of a problem. I guess if we want to speak in today's terms, a lot of people aren't going to be dealing with that. So, but in my day with this car, all of those differential cases need to replace that. The plastic ones, they twist too much. You lose your mesh, they start stripping and having all that issues. So honestly, that was my number one issue with the Kraton 6S line. Now the Arma Mojave is starting to feel like the Typhon 6S when I'm talking straight out of the box, problems or durability or fun factor. Many of you know how I feel about the Arma Mojave. I mean, this thing is just a tank. This is the car you could take out there and just thrash, beat around, take out in the snow, the mud, whoop on, and she'll just keep on going. It don't care. But if there's one thing on this car out of the box that I hated the most and had the most amount of problems until doing this modification was the body post setup. They're very tall. There's a lot of plastic here, a lot of stuff to bend, twist, and break, and especially in the colder weather, these things snap all the time. Now, I had taken chunks of my pit map, one of the pit mats I had, balled it up into the perfect size and squeezed it in there nice and tight, and then put a couple zip ties on it, and it has saved these things. I've had probably 80% less problems with the body post with doing that modification. Besides that, most of this car, I put aluminum differential case on this one. We are running a new M2C Racing chassis on here, and of course the upper hinge pins, because I've changed this out on pretty much every one of my 6S cars because it was the problem child across the board, like I was saying. But besides that, guys, the Mojave, I've gone through a few bodies. The bodies do break, especially if you're whooping on this thing pretty hard and doing some of the dumb stuff I do with this. But all in all, the Mojave, man, out of the box is just one of the best cars to just go out there and have fun, beat on, and it just doesn't care. Well, let's talk the M2C jackhammer, which formerly known as the Traxxas Sledge. Now, I'm sure you guys are probably going to know exactly where I'm coming from when I first got this car. This thing was fun out of the box. It wasn't too bad of a car. However, it had one major downfall, and that was the whole motor mount, motor mesh, gearing this thing up system was the dumbest design I'd ever seen on a car. Be 100% honest with you. I was so glad whenever M2C Racing started putting together plans on this thing for a different chassis, or even the same chassis with putting together a whole new motor mount system. It just transformed this car and allowed so much modifications and more things you could do to this car, because in a stock form, you know, this thing, you couldn't barely put a big motor mount because it was hitting the steering rack. Converting this thing over to the jackhammer was definitely the best thing I did to this car. But straight out of the box, the thing I hated the most was definitely the whole motor mount setup they did in this car. It was stupid. It was the dumbest design I have ever seen. But they did do one thing very right. If we're going to talk about something, be nice to the Traxxas, was the A-arms they put on this car. Not sure if it's a design, the plastic, but the A-arms, they got very right on this car, and they hold up very, very well. Now, I was debating on bringing up a couple of my street cars here, my Infraction 6S or the Infraction 3S. Honestly, the street cars, guys, it's kind of in a different realm, but I don't really have much of a complaint out of the street cars. I mean, you guys have seen I beat the snot out of both of my Infractions, and these things have just held up amazing. I've been in disbelief on launching these things off the ramps, how well they've held up. So not really, honestly, a lot to discuss about the street cars. They're fun and amazingly durable for what you can do with them. Real quick, we're just going to touch base on the one with Arlo. Now, they have been continuing to work on these things. The only thing that I really had a massive complaint about with this first run of this particular Arlo was the whole motor mount, gear mesh setup, and changing out the gears. It seems like they're continuing to work on this and improve it, but changing gears and getting your motor and stuff out of there in the original setup was definitely not any fun. Another thing on one of the other cars here, on one of the other Arlo cars, this thing, you guys may have seen the ramp bash with this thing. I was amazed on the durability and how well this thing held up on the ramp bash. However, one thing on all cars, especially if you're going to be considering it an off-road vehicle, you got to put the receiver inside of a waterproof box. And look, my fan is gone. And last but not least, we are going to talk about the Arrma 8S. Now, obviously, we're talking about the current version. This is the Outcast 8S EXB. This is not the newest versions that they just have out. But I don't think, I might be mistaken here, but I don't think that they changed out or improved the number one problem with these cars, especially if you're planning on doing any heavier jumping with them. So who wants to take a guess? Who wants to think what my number one issue with this car is with trying to bash it heavily? Any takers? You want to drop a comment down or maybe pause this for a second and see who guesses this right? If you want to say center braces or something, no, wouldn't be right. A-arms, they're definitely weak, but that's still not it. Or maybe it's a little underpowered out of the box to really be able to properly backflip this thing. Nope, that wouldn't be it either. But if you guessed the bulkheads, the front and rear bulkheads, you would be correct. Number one reason why I've been hesitant on taking these out and really bashing them anymore is because of the bulkheads. And as many of you guys may have seen, and I know Kevin Talbot recently touched base on this in his modification to help with it, but it still doesn't eliminate it, are these bulkheads and ripping the screws out of them. And it gets really obnoxious because it's not exactly an easy job. There's maybe a 6S and, cars replacing the bulkheads on these things. And they're not cheap. And the only fix for them really that I've seen are putting the Vitivon ones on. And I think you're looking at, I think they're like 110. I might be wrong on the price, but somewhere around 100 or over $100, for each end. So now you're looking at over $200 just for the aluminum bulkheads on these cars. Okay, I was off. I just checked the price, $140 at end. So you're looking at, after tax and all that good, close to $300 for a set of bulkheads for this car so you can actually properly jump this thing. And what I'm referring to, if you don't know, are whenever you really launch this car and heavily beat on it, these screws on the front bulkhead here just rip themselves right out of the plastic, and now your bulkheads are basically flopping in the wind. I've had it happen on the front and the rear. Probably, I've changed out the Outcast here. I think this is the third set on this car. And the Kraton 8S, I've probably done it, I think twice. The ones I just put on there now was the second set I've had on that car. Now, obviously, I know there's a fix for that, replacing them out with the aluminum versions. Now you're looking at $300 for bulkheads for this thing. And it's a lot more weight added to an already heavy car. So out of the box, my number one complaint on this car are the plastic bulkheads. You cannot beat this thing heavily without those things ripping out all the time, and it's annoying. So yeah, that's my biggest complaint on the Outcast 8S. Now, obviously, there's a few other things that were annoying with this thing, and they still are to this day, is the steering rack on this thing. The steering isn't the greatest. Now, I am still running the stock servo. However, just in general, with wanting to go out there and beat on this thing heavily, I'm honestly afraid to anymore because I'm tired of changing out the bulkheads. And yeah, I could go buy them, but honestly, I don't really want to put $300 into this car and make it heavier. So I'm not sure. I've just been kind of, if I do take this out, I'm kind of babying a little bit more. So when you guys see videos coming up with this, why I'm not launching it as big as I used to is mainly because of that. I just don't want to replace the bulkheads in this thing anymore. I know it might sound stupid, but that's my reasoning, guys. Now, obviously, there's been many other cars in this fleet that some of you may have seen come and gone. For instance, my Traxxas Wrestler. That car was nothing but a problem child out of the box. When I ran it for the first time in my back lot, I literally did not run that thing for more than probably 45 seconds, maybe a minute. I broke the shocks and blew apart something else. Every car, no matter what it is, going to have its weak spots and the things that it needs, out of the box, depending on how heavily you're going to be beating on it, jumping it, and all that good stuff. But I was kind of putting together a little video here on the things that, out of the box that drove me nuts about each one of my cars. So I figured I'd put this little video together, and I'm kind of stuck inside because of weather and timing. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, but that's going to do it for today. So until next time, y'all be safe. Be careful out there. Peace out, everybody.